In 2006, a JPMorgan analyst reviewed a pool of home loans the bank was packaging for investors. Her internal report flagged them as garbage. Her bosses read it. The deal closed anyway. Those securities destroyed billions in retirement savings across the country. And Jamie Dimon, who ran the whole operation, made $23 million that year alone. So why has no one ever told you about that email? JPMorgan Chase is the bank that was supposed to be different. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008 and half of Wall Street was on life support, JPMorgan was holding the defibrillator. They stepped in to absorb Bear Stearns. They helped stabilize the system. Jamie Dimon was called a financial statesman. The New York Times put him on the cover. While other bank CEOs were dragged in front of Congress and humiliated on live television, Dimon was the one the government called for advice. America trusted this bank. Here is what was actually happening inside JPMorgan between 2005 and 2007. The bank's due diligence teams were reviewing pools of mortgages, loans bundled together and sold to investors as low-risk income products called mortgage-backed securities. These were the engine of the housing boom. And the teams kept finding the same thing. Loans already in delinquency, properties appraised fraudulently, borrowers who had never verified their income. They wrote it in internal reports. They used words like material defects and misrepresented, and in at least one documented case, a phrase translating politely as extremely poor quality. Those reports went up the chain, and in almost every case, the securitization process continued anyway. The loans were bundled, they were rated, they were sold, not to hedge funds placing informed bets on risk, to teachers' pension funds, to city governments. To institutional investors who had no reason to suspect the bank's own analysts had already called the product defective. When the housing market collapsed in 2008 and those securities went worthless, JPMorgan had a ready-made defense: blame the banks they had acquired. Bear Stearns originated many of these loans. Washington Mutual did too. The government had practically begged JPMorgan to absorb those acquisitions to prevent wider collapse at fire sale prices with tens of billions in federal backing. Now those same acquisitions became the shield. The fraud was theirs, the argument went. Not ours. But the Department of Justice had the emails. They had the internal due diligence reports. They had documentation showing that JPMorgan's own teams, not Bear Stearns, not WAMU's, had flagged defects on loans that JPMorgan itself originated, packaged, and sold. The narrative was cracking. In November 2013, JPMorgan settled with the Department of Justice for $13 billion, the largest settlement with a single company in American history. The headlines called it a reckoning. Here is what they did not tell you. Of that $13 billion, $4 billion was designated as consumer relief, meaning JPMorgan received credit for modifying mortgages and forgiving balances on loans already underwater. Some of that relief would have happened anyway under existing modification programs. The bank received credit for it regardless. Another $6.5 billion of the total was structured as tax-deductible, meaning American taxpayers effectively subsidized roughly half the fine that was supposed to punish the bank for defrauding American investors. And the investors themselves, the pension funds, the municipalities, the retirement accounts that held those securities and watched them collapse to zero, received $4.5 billion, split among thousands of institutional claimants, spread across years of legal proceedings. Not one person who wrote those internal emails flagging defective loans and then closed the deals faced a criminal charge. Not one faced personal financial penalty. No clawback of bonuses. No forfeiture of compensation earned while the fraud was ongoing. And Jamie Dimon? The board reviewed the year JPMorgan paid the largest corporate settlement in American history and voted to increase his compensation to $20 million. This is where the system reveals its architecture. Attorney General Eric Holder had already said it publicly under oath before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Some financial institutions are so large that prosecuting them criminally could destabilize the broader economy. Too big to jail. He said those exact words out loud, on the record. JPMorgan at the time held approximately $2.4 trillion in assets. It employed 260,000 people. The government's calculation was explicit. The institution is more valuable intact than accountable. So the resolution was civil. No criminal charges against the bank. No criminal charges against any individual. A fine absorbed by shareholders, not executives, and partially structured so that taxpayers recovered a portion of the cost through the deduction. Holder left the government shortly after and joined a law firm representing major financial institutions. The emails exist. The due diligence reports are part of the public court record. You can read the exact language JP Morgan's own analysts used to describe the loans they then sold as safe investments. None of that was buried forever. What was buried, deliberately, strategically, and successfully, was any individual consequence. JP Morgan just reported the highest annual profit in its history. The system that allowed a bank to internally document that it was selling defective products, settle for a fine that taxpayers helped absorb, and then grow into the most profitable financial institution in American history. That system is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. For whom?